Have record on the cloud.
We'll start it.
You got it? Okay, good. All right, welcome everyone to the second class on Nagarjuna's letter to a friend. Let's go ahead and start with our prayers. And will Jana be leading us in those? Okay, thank you, Jana.
To the founder, the endowed,
Transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge.
this ground
Anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, four continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kampirya.
I go for refuge until I am enlightened
To the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings.
Sangye
Chodam Soki Chodam La, Jamchu Bardu Dagni Kyamsu Chi, Daki Chanyen Gi Pe Sonam Gi, Dola Penchir Sangye Drupar Sho, Sangye Chodam Soki Chodam La, Jamchu Bardu Dagni Kyamsu Chi, Daki Chanyen Gi Pe Sonam Gi, Drola Penchir Sangye Drupar Sho. Okay, thank you, Jenna, and thank you, Mary, for sharing those prayers. Let's do a short meditation, give ourselves a chance to kind of focus the mind a bit, let go of whatever distractions we might have from our day. And then we'll set our motivation together. So just find a good meditation posture, one where the back is straight. Oops, put the little ringer here for ringing the bell in the gompa. Then just begin to attend to the breath, and again, use whatever technique you prefer to use with the breath. Try to keep your awareness there with the breath, but when the mind wanders, just gently let go of whatever it was that distracted you and return to the breath. So I'll ring the chime here in the gompa to start the meditation. So now let's set our motivation together for tonight's session. And these teachings that we're looking at in Nagarjuna's text, Letter to a Friend. I mentioned last week that they're going to primarily be teachings within the two lower scopes of the long rim. But there will be certainly times when we look at the Mahayana path. But we have to recall that all of these teachings are a part of the Mahayana path. We have to begin where we are. As we know from our long rim teachings, we have to first have the motivation that seeks to achieve a good rebirth, that lets go of the preoccupation we have with this life, seeking the happiness of this life alone, and direct our attention to future lives. This is the beginning of our Dharma practice. This is where Nagarjuna will spend a fair amount of time helping us, giving us advice on how we can actually do that with this life most effectively. We want to go beyond that motivation right now in terms of setting our intention for being here, though, to include the second level of the stages of the path, which Nagarjuna will also deal with to a large degree. That each of us has the potential to be completely liberated from samsara, from this state of cyclic existence. For countless lifetimes, we've been under the control of our karma and delusions, going from life to life, never finding any true peace, any lasting happiness. This is a more lasting goal, a more definite goal that we can strive to achieve. And it's good to adjust our motivation to that level. We're not just here for a good rebirth that will last for a while, but we're also here so that we can attain freedom from rebirth altogether. And then finally, we arrive at the Mahayana motivation, this wish to go beyond just our own liberation. And we see that others are suffering just like us. Others seek happiness just like us and yet are thwarted in attaining that. And so we generate this motivation to develop ourselves completely, to become a Buddha. For in that state, we then can help others perfectly, can bring them all the way to enlightenment, having attained that state ourselves. So everything encompassed in Nagarjuna's text contributes to achieving these goals. And so we want to set the motivation at the highest level so that everything we do, all the words we hear, the thoughts we have, the words we speak, all of this creates the causes for that ultimate result, our own enlightenment and the enlightenment of all beings. And just hold that heart that is embracing the welfare of all beings for a moment before we begin. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So in last week's class, I did introduce the text a little bit, and we began with the first three verses. I might say a little bit more about the text later on, especially the additional text that I'm encouraging you to read, recommending that you read from Geshe Sopa that was recently published. I do need to have screen sharing. Somehow I lost my co-host thing. Yeah, not sure how that happened. Well, let me go ahead and talk about the book just for a moment. There might be others joining yet, but if you had any desire to purchase either a hard copy or the Kindle or other versions, e-versions of this book, this is the publication by Wisdom Publications called Nagarjuna's Advice for Buddhists, with commentary by Geshe Sopa. And I'm just encouraging you to have that as an additional resource. I'll be occasionally pulling some things from this. We did work out with Wisdom to get a 40% discount on this book, either version, but it was only good until the 15th. And I think there was maybe a few people who didn't get ordered in time. If that's the case, please let me know. My email address is on the reading list, and you've all received the reading list, hopefully. But anyway, let someone know. And I'm going to ask Wisdom if they can reopen that window for another week or so that we can place some orders if people still wanted to purchase that. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and get started again with our looking at this text. Do have one file actually I need to pull up that I forgot to when I sat down here. Let me get that up. It's only going to take me a second. It's just a little PowerPoint presentation. I think I've only got one or two slides to share from that tonight. But I think I did have a little slide in there that kind of showed the overall structure of the text. I'm not sure. This is an interesting text. I mentioned last week that it's not in sort of an ordinary format, as we often see in Mahayana texts in terms of the Lam Rim and what have you. But nonetheless, it has some amazing advice that's been put together again by Nagarjuna as advice to his friend who was a king at the time in India. And it's good advice for lay practitioners as well as certainly those who are ordained. But mainly householders, lay practitioners. So last week we looked at the prefacing verses. This was a set of verses that just kind of got us into the ballpark, talking about making praise to Buddha Shakyamuni and so on. And this is again verses that were not from Nagarjuna's text, but rather from the commentary by Venerable Rendawa. That also is on your reading list, and that one you can obtain in a hard version, well, not a hardbound, but a paper version. But it's also available on the link that I have on the reading list. Then we have what we did last week, part 1, recommendation to heed. These are the first 3 verses in which Nagarjuna is encouraging us to take this advice to heart, to not think that we've heard these teachings before, so we don't need to listen to them again, or that because maybe the style is not so eloquent that we don't, there's no merit to doing this. But this is again verses that we went through that I don't need to really touch on again. The entire rest of the text is, oops, how did I do that? Somehow I got all the way back there. Okay, that's right. I put it in for tonight. Okay, the entire rest of the text is verses 4 through 123. And that is divided into 3 main parts. And we're going to start the first part tonight. The general advice concerning virtuous practices. What Nagarjuna tends to really orient himself towards and the advice he's tending to give us is that we need to let go of our practice of non-virtue, which we're all very familiar with, and to move towards more virtuous practice. This is kind of the main thing we can do with this human life, especially as a householder, a lay practitioner. So we're going to see that being given in terms of 3 different sections. The first is the general advice for both the householders and those who are departed from the home life. Again, we touched on this outline briefly last time. The instruction that is directed primarily to householders, that's a good chunk from 9 through 37. And then some instruction to both householders and those departed from the home life concerning not just getting, having a more productive life, but how you can actually pursue these higher states of rebirth, as well as what is called in this text supreme beatitude. Remember, I talked a little bit last week about how if we took everything the Buddha taught, we can say there are 2 main goals that the Buddha is helping us to achieve. The happiness of this life comes by the way. That's not the main goal the Buddha is helping us to accomplish. We want to, first of all, be dedicated to the happiness of future rebirths, to make sure that we create the causes to have a continuity of those rebirths, so we can continue our spiritual practice and have ideal conditions for doing that. But the other result is a more definite form of goodness, or again, as was called here, a supreme beatitude, a more fixed result, one that we won't decline from. This human rebirth only lasts as long as this life lasts, and then we go to another existence. So it's not definite in that way. The 2 results that are more definite are liberation, which we went over in the motivation tonight, achieving freedom from the state of samsara, our own personal nirvana, and enlightenment, which goes beyond that nirvana to become a Buddha for the sake of all beings. So again, that's the basic structure of the text. In this first section, looking at virtuous practices, that's what we're going to be engaged in, is first the general advice for both householders and those who are departed from the home life. And we're going to be listening to it and discussing it primarily in the context of householders, because most of us here are householders, if not all of us. There are three parts to this in turn. The six remembrances, or sometimes called recollections. That's verse 4, and there's going to be a bit of commentary on that. The 10 paths, most of you have heard of these. These are the 10 virtuous paths that are the opposite of the 10 non-virtues, which you studied if you studied the Lam Rim. That's one of the main teachings in the section on karma. And then finally, the six paramitas. This is one verse where Nagarjuna does more specifically talk about Mahayana practices, the six perfections or paramitas. So this is where we're going in terms of this tonight. We're going to start with the six remembrances, which is verse 4. So I'm going to continue to share my screen, but share now the um, go to the actual text that we're using. Let me see if I can find it. Again, this is what you'll find if you go to the one link for this commentary by Venerable Rendawa. I introduced you to Venerable Rendawa, and by the way, there's a nice introduction to Venerable Rendawa and Nagarjuna in this book. But essentially, it's a little hard to read because you get into this really tiny print and so on. So what I've done is I've kind of downloaded it into my Word file, and I'm kind of manipulating it there so I can, have that in front of you and in front of me as we go through this. So we're in the second portion of the text, as it says here, which deals with the actual instruction. Recall that it's divided into those three parts I just went through. I won't repeat that. The very first part, general advice concerning virtuous practices. This division itself has 3 chapters. We talked about that. The general advice for both householders and those departed from the home life is the first part. And then recall that I just showed on the screen the 3 parts to that, the 6 remembrances. So it says here, the first is advice to maintain an abiding attitude of faith through the 6 remembrances. The following verse illustrates that faith towards the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha, generosity, the act of giving, the act of morality, practice of that, and then the deities, is the root of all virtue, and that one should constantly bring the 6 remembrances to mind in order to increase this faith. So last week I did talk a little bit about faith. And faith in Buddhism, again, is not blind faith. It might start off with a bit of that flavor to it. And if you recall when you first found Buddhism, however many years ago that was, or even months perhaps, or weeks for some of you, but when you think about that initial sort of romance period, honeymoon period, where you kind of fall in love with the Dharma, and the Dharma seems to be this wonderful shiny jewel, and it's an important part of developing our faith, to kind of have that attraction. As we begin to see what the Dharma is, we gain what's called clear faith, a form of faith that's based on some sort of clarity in regard to what the Buddha taught, and the Buddha as a teacher of the Dharma and so on. Then we kind of develop a more convinced faith, one that is rooted in conviction. That's through our actual experience and practice. If it doesn't develop into that, then it becomes a little shaky. It's not so grounded. We have to ground it in our actual practice. That's the second level. Finally, the third level is the aspiring faith that is based on our wanting to move in that direction, a more dedicated form of practice, having seen that these teachings have truth to them, that there's merit to them, and so on. So these are the ways that we're going to be looking at generating faith, specifically in 6 things. Again, these are often called, as I said, the 6 recollections, sometimes even 6 mindfulnesses. Here they're called the 6 remembrances. The idea behind this is that these are 6 things that we should be bringing to mind throughout our day. We should be mindful of them. Of course, the first 3 are quite familiar to most of us, right? The 3 jewels, the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And we're bringing them to mind whenever we engage in practice, hopefully, with the thought, the intention that we want to be in line with the Buddha himself as the guide who taught the Dharma, the actual instruction, and then, of course, the Sangha, the spiritual practitioners who are helping us on our path. This is how we kind of recollect what it is that we're about. As Buddhist practitioners, whether we have taken refuge vows or not, whether you've done that full ceremony or not, wherever you're at with it, this is the advice that we want to be following. the Dharma itself, and of course the Buddha as the teacher of that, the Sangha who practice it. This is an important part of our daily practice, is to make sure that we are in line with those teachings. Otherwise, we're going astray. So let's go ahead and take a look. There's going to be, again, a rather extensive explanation on these, and even kind of tying back to that wonderful verse that we recited at the beginning of tonight, where we talk about the Buddha's amazing qualities. So the 6 remembrances is set out in verse 4. The Jinna, this word Jinna is a term that is usually translated as conqueror. It's referring to the Buddha. That's why it's capitalized. It's a proper noun referring to the Buddha. The Buddha himself proclaimed the 6 remembrances. Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. Again, those 3 are the 3 jewels. Generosity, morality, and the deities. We're going to get into a deeper explanation of what all those mean. Recall each of their several virtues. By recalling their virtues, we become very inspired to move in that direction, again, to follow this path that we are having some conviction in already through our own faith that we've developed. So, Venerable Randhawa's commentary says, the Jinnas are those who have triumphed entirely over all evil. This word evil is a bit antiquated. There's sometimes when this translation sounds a little strange. Evil or sin, these are words that we don't see as often in more contemporary Buddhist translations. But the idea is they've entirely triumphed. They have conquered. That's why Jinna is usually translated as the conqueror. They've conquered everything that is discordant to the mind. Remember that the term for Buddha, I think I may have mentioned this last week, I'm not sure. In Tibetan, they took this word Buddha that means awakened in Sanskrit, and they made 2 words and put them together to create the word Buddha in Tibetan. And that's Sangye. We recited it when we recited the refuge verse. Sang means to completely purify all of this evil or sins or negativities, everything that obscures our mind. Gye means to fully develop all the positive qualities, all the compassion, loving kindness, and so on. And of course, in a Mahayana perspective, this is the goal that we're trying to achieve, is to develop our minds to that degree. And we all have Buddha nature. We all have the potential to do that. And we'll not necessarily touch on that topic directly, but it is important to emphasize that this is why these teachings are capable of being followed, is because we have the potential to develop our minds to that degree. So the 6 remembrances, Buddha and the rest, which were proclaimed by Lord Buddha, are to be recalled constantly each day. How is this to be done? By remembering and calling to mind the variety of good qualities pertaining to Buddha and the others as they have been stated in the sutras. So this is the advice that right from the beginning Nagarjuna is giving us. He's saying, and to his kingly friend, this is an important part of our practice, is to recall, be mindful of these 6 things, especially the first 3, but even the last 3 play a role in terms of our daily behavior. So we have it then divided into sections for each of these. And by the way, on these 3, the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, I might point out, and you can find this, it's a free download from the FPMT. There's a sutra called Sutra Remembering the 3 Jewels, and much of the terminology that we're looking at comes from this. It's just a very short practice. You can print this out as a little booklet, as I've done here, and it's just a few pages, and you can recite this every day or as many times a day as you wish to bring to mind, particularly the qualities of the 3 jewels, the first 3 recollections. We have a similar homage that's here, homage to the omniscient one, purified and consummate, victorious, virtuous, and transcendent, thus gone, foe-destroying, entirely perfect Buddha, full of wisdom, and so on. I won't go through all of that. But even in our prayer that we recited tonight, as I said, we have that wonderful encapsulation of all the qualities of the Buddha. So there we have to the founder, endowed, transcendent, destroyer, and so on. They actually say that the first 5 lines, the first 5 lines up till where it says supreme guide of human beings to be tamed. The first 5 lines pertain to all the qualities that are involved in kind of from the Buddhist side of having fully developed their own minds. The next qualities, where it says supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, these are the qualities that pertain to the Buddha's activities in the world. So we can talk about the Buddha himself possessing these qualities and all Buddhas having these qualities, and then how those qualities manifest in terms of their ability to benefit other sentient beings. So you'll see this to some degree when we go through this commentary. Whoops, that's just the verses. Let's go to the commentary. And I'm not keeping track of where this is in the little book, if you have the book from the Library of Tibetan Works and Archives, but you should be able to find it pretty easily. The first recollection, the recollection or remembrance of Buddha. Of these 6 remembrances, the following are the virtues of the Buddha. The Buddha is the Bhagawan, Tathagata, Arhat, and the fully enlightened one. He is the one endowed with knowledge and its foundation, Sugata, knower of the world, unsurpassed leader of the ones who are disciplined, and the teacher of gods and men. So everything we have in our prayer is in that. I think we have an extra one, maybe founder. I think that's the initial and the founder, photostor, So we have maybe 1 or 2 extra epithets for the Buddha, but nonetheless, these are the main ones. Venerable Rendawa says the Buddha is called Bhagawan. Chomdende, I think, is the Tibetan for this, literally blessed Lord, because he has conquered the 4 demons, or they're often called the 4 maras, and because he is endowed with the highest of fortunes. So let's talk a little bit about this Bhagawan being kind of having destroyed these maras. The maras, it's kind of an interesting thing about these maras. There are 4 of them. Only one of them is a force actually external to ourselves, but obviously it still entails something we've done to invite that sort of mayhem, that influence in our lives. This one that is something outside of ourselves, it's often called the son of the gods, the Deva Putra. And the idea is it's sort of like a Cupid, Cupid, Valentine's Day is coming up, right? And Cupid shoots a little arrow. This is kind of a being who has some sort of way of causing something to arise in your mind that's afflicted. You say he's got 5 arrows that represent different afflictions like anger and desire and what have you, jealousy. All of these things are really, again, whether there is this external being or not, we certainly see that we have moments like that where suddenly, for no reason at all, something arises and we kind of, where did that come from? It may not even be in relation to a particular person or object or what have you. So this is the only one of these 4 maras that is actually another being. The other 3 are still called maras or demons, but they are demons that we have kind of within our own continuum. One of them is the Mara of the afflictions, which is just those afflictions that exist in seed form that ripen into the manifest afflictions when we meet with particular objects, when an object of desire or hatred, what have you, arises in our sphere of influence and knowledge. The second Mara after that is the Mara of the aggregates. Aggregates is a term that's used in Buddhism to refer to the kind of collection of stuff that makes up a being. These are often called the 5 heaps. The 5 aggregates consist of 4 that are mental and 1 that is physical. The one that is physical is the heap of stuff that is this body, right? We all have a body, some sort of embodiment. It is a collection of stuff. It's an aggregation of stuff. The other 4 pertain to various aspects of our mind. I won't go into all of them tonight, but they are all the sort of mental heaps, mental components that we all have. The main consciousnesses, as well as various mental factors, as they're called, specific things that are operating in our minds at certain times. So we all have those aggregates. Those are our conditioned aggregates, our contaminated aggregates. They are a Mara or a demon because they're not perfected, right? We don't have the perfect mind and body of a Buddha yet. So in that way, they act as a negative influence on us. The last one is actually called the Mara of the Lord of Death, but it's not, again, an animate being. It's actually the reality of death, impermanence in that gross manifestation that we all have to deal with. Every being who is born has to die. Even the Buddha died, even Jesus Christ died, even Mohammed died, even all the great beings who have ever been born in this world have died. Death is a reality for all of us, and it becomes a demon in a sense because it can rob us of our vitality like that. Suddenly we're on our deathbed or have an accident, and that's the end of the line. Death is playing that particular role. You can be free of death. You can be free of contaminated aggregates. You can be free of the aggregates. And of course, you can be free of these Devaputras that are these mischief makers. And you can do that through conquering them with the path that the Buddha taught. So we call the Buddha a Bhagawan. Bhagawan can be used in, I think in the Hindu traditions, it's used in a slightly different way, but the idea is here is it's someone who has done that conquering, who has actually removed those factors so that you need not experience them any longer. Okay. I'm not going to explain all of these epithets as extensively as that, but I think this one, because of the terminology, I just wanted to make sure that people are aware of what it means to call the Buddha a Bhagawan. Again, conquered the four demons and in being endowed with the highest of fortunes, which again would be the complete actualization of their potential in Buddhahood. He is called Tathagata or Tathagata. I never know quite how to pronounce some of these Sanskrit terms. That is literally the one gone thus, the one gone to thusness, because he has attained realization of thusness. Thusness is emptiness. It means that the Buddha is fully imbued with the wisdom of emptiness at all times. You know, when we're generating some understanding of emptiness, very hard to keep it in the mind. And even when you gain certain realizations, you can have that more direct knowledge of it, but you can't keep it in your mind all the time. The Buddha is never parted from the state of thusness and knowing emptiness. The Buddha knows that continually through their wisdom mind, their omniscient mind that they possess. And then it says, or because everything is just as he has said it to be. It is thus, in other words, and not otherwise. In other words, the Buddha knows that truth, that things are thus, things are empty of inherent existence. Again, I'm not going to go into emptiness so much tonight. We do have bits in the text where Nagarjuna does go into emptiness a bit, which is nice. We get some of his philosophical teachings kind of peppered in there a little bit in this text. It's a bit more about behavior and action. The next line, it says, and he is called Arhat, defeater of the enemy, because he has defeated the enemy of the mental afflictions, or because he is worthy of being worshipped through offerings and veneration. By the way, as we go through these, I might point out that there is a book that some of you may have. I don't know, this is a new series of books that's been coming out for a few years now by Venerable Children and His Holiness the Dalai Lama. This is the fourth volume in that, called Following in the Buddha's Footsteps. And there is a whole section that goes through the recollection of these three jewels, because refuge is one of the initial topics in this. And I may read a little bit from that later, but I just wanted to point out it's quite nice because it goes into a bit more description about each of these. Again, I don't want to go too deeply into them. It's just important that we understand these are all the virtues, these are all the qualities that the Buddha possesses. This is what makes the Buddha a reliable guide for us. If the Buddha didn't have these qualities, then we might be putting our refuge, our faith in a being who doesn't actually have the accomplishments that we are seeking to attain ourselves. So we need someone who has obtained these. All right, let's continue on with the next paragraph. The Buddha is also called fully enlightened one because he has comprehended all things truly and unerringly. He is enlightened to the reality of everything that exists. The Buddha can say this exists, this doesn't exist. You know, the Buddha has that perfect knowledge again through an omniscient mind. He is said to be endowed with knowledge because he possesses wisdom, which is with its foundation, in that he possesses the morality and the mental concentration upon which knowledge is based. Take it off screen just a moment while we talk about these three things that were mentioned. We have wisdom, which is the culmination of our practice. It's really the main aim of our practice. But to have the highest training in wisdom, you need the higher training in concentration, because you cannot change your mind to the degree that you'd like without deep concentration. This is why concentration, developing this stability of mind, is an important aspect of our practice. It's good to spend some time every day doing some single-pointed meditation, trying to make the mind less distracted and more stable. And we're going to see some teachings on this throughout the text as well. This is not something we all have time to do, perhaps again in a more focused retreat, like a 2-year or 3-year retreat or something, where we can actually go off and develop this deep state of concentration. But every time we sit down and do this, it does make a difference. It does contribute to it. Okay, because there's Geshe Sherab even often emphasizes when he teaches on this that continuity of practice is so important. Every day to spend some period of time focusing the mind on the breath or some other object, the Buddha, visualized Buddha, what have you. That's, again, the basis for us having wisdom. Wisdom is the key result we want to get, but you have to have concentration to develop wisdom to that degree. That's going to change the very nature of your mind. But how do you get good concentration? You need the foundation of morality. And if we know from our own experience, when we've sat down to meditate, say you just had a really bad phone conversation with somebody or texting with somebody, and it really was, unnerving. They were like, why is this person being such a jerk? Right? You have that kind of thoughts, and maybe you're even starting to write some negative things to them and what have you. And then you sit down to meditate. Good luck having the mind get still and focused, right? Because the mind's like totally agitated by virtue of what you have engaged in riling up your own thoughts and animosity and whatever towards another being. Well, we can see that that's a coarser example of it. But if you don't have a good foundation of morality, they say it's impossible to develop these deep levels of concentration. You have to be meticulous in your morality. We're going to see morality coming up a number of times in this text. In the very next verse after this one, we look at the 10 paths of virtue and the 10 non-virtuous actions, and we see how we have to really be meticulous again in paying attention to those so that we aren't disturbing the mind constantly. We may think that it doesn't mean much to do this or do that with some sort of non-virtuous mindset and behavior, but it actually has a very deep impression on us. At least it should. I guess because there are some human beings who do all these things every day and it doesn't even faze them, right? They just keep going about their business. But they have made their mind into such a sort of murky, mucky state that it's going to be very hard if they ever meet with these teachings. Hopefully they will, and they try to move in that direction. They have so much sort of heaviness of their mind from having engaged in non-virtue. So take to heart this advice that, we need the wisdom, like the Buddha's developed, be endowed with that knowledge. But the only way to get it is through having deep concentration. And the only way to have that is through having good morality, a higher training in morality, as it's often called. These 3 higher trainings, you might recall, are presented in the Lamrim under the topic of what is the path to liberation? How is it that we actually attain the state of peace, the state of nirvana? All right, let's go back to the text. Again, I didn't want to spend too much time on each of these little uh, kind of sayings of the Buddha, the way that we talk about the Buddha, the qualities of the Buddha, but nonetheless, I think that's an important one. So we're in that first full paragraph that's on the screen towards the end, where it says he is called the Sugata, the one who has fared well. This is kind of an interesting translation. Usually it's called the one gone to bliss. Su means bliss, gata means to go to bliss. The Buddhas haven't gone to bliss, they're all blissed out. Right? And that's again because the Buddha has reached the sublime state, or else because he will not fall back from it. He's blissed out and will never be unblissed. This is the bliss of Buddhahood that we're all trying to achieve. That is the fulfillment of our own kind of welfare, how we actually have the potential to attain such high levels of well-being. The next part, we're getting now again into the ability for the Buddha to work well for others, to kind of know the world and lead people in that direction. But this is still one of the personal qualities of the Buddha, to be a knower of the world. And why is he called that? Because, as Venerable Rendawa says, in realizing the nature of the 12 limbs of dependent origination, he knows exactly the world of living beings. And in understanding the origin of the earth, the mountains and such, in knowing all regions, their dimensions and so on, he knows exactly the external physical world. So he knows the internal world of how beings are reborn through what are called the 12 links or limbs of dependent origination. They come up much later in the text, 109 through 111, and we'll see where we're at when we get there if we have time to go into that teaching in a little more detail. It's a wonderful teaching the Buddha gave from the very beginning of his career almost. He first started teaching about the Four Noble Truths, but the 12 links of dependent origination are an elaboration of that concept. How is it that we go from life to life? What is the exact mechanism? The first link being ignorance, and then through ignorance we engage in an action, a karma, and then through that action being imprinted on the mind, it eventually ripens into a state of existence and so on. This is all spelled out in these 12 links. It becomes like a circle, and it's often depicted as a wheel. And so the idea is this wheel of life is something that we need to be aware of ourselves. The Buddha knows it exactly. He knows the internal processes by which all of us are being reborn and continuing to experience this dissatisfaction of samsara. But of course, the Buddha also knows the path that leads out of that. And that's what he taught, is the way in which we can be free of that. But then, as it was said in the description that it was on the screen a minute ago, the Buddha also knows everything about the world that exists, the external world, how things came into creation. Because the Buddha has an omniscient mind. I might mention, when we're talking about this whole concept of knowing the world or knowing all things, that in some of the lower schools of Buddhism, they actually say that a Buddha sort of turns their mind to something and then they know it. So if you ask the Buddha, well, how did this galaxy come into existence? Well, then the Buddha would say, oh, it's this way, based on him having kind of retrieved that information, probably faster than Google, right? But the idea is that in the Mahayana teachings, they say the Buddha knows all this all the time, which is kind of hard for us to get our heads around, right? What is it like when we have a hard time remembering like where our keys are and where this is at and what is that? Two or three things is about the most we can remember at any one time, maybe. But the Buddha knows all these things like that. It doesn't even have to turn his attention to it or her attention to it. You usually use he because the Buddha of this era appeared as in a male form. The Buddhas don't have a particular gender, just the way they appear. So the Buddha has that kind of complete knowledge at all time. Not somebody who simply, directs their mind to something and they know it. They know it all at every moment. And it's even more mind-boggling to think that they know the past, the present, and the future. You kind of go, well, how do they do that? I don't know. The Buddha never explained how Buddhists do this, but it's an interesting concept, right? Because the Buddha has that knowledge, that awareness, because the Buddha is sort of timeless, going throughout all of existence. Once you become a Buddha, you have access to that data, if you will, that data that is there to be known, that isn't bound in the way that we are bound by time. Anyway, that's some interesting little tidbits about Buddha knowledge. It's a very hard thing to get our heads around, but this is what we mean by the Buddha. And when we think about these qualities, I mean, it's quite impressive, right? That he knows everything about the external world and so on. Now we're getting into the way that the Buddha is responsive to sentient beings. And here we get a little analogy. It says here, the driver of a cart will attach his vehicle oxen, which have not been trained before. So he's going to attach oxen to his vehicle that haven't been trained. If they are fit for the task of drawing it, once the oxen are yoked, he restrains those which draw the wagon improperly and places those who have gone astray on the right path. Those who travel too slowly, the driver strikes with an iron prod. Kind of a horrible imagery, but nonetheless. Then the unruly ones, those that cannot be yoked to the vehicle, he leaves undisturbed. He kind of says, okay, well, then you're not going to work out for now. So if we think like the Buddha is sort of the cart master, the vehicle master, and he's taking various oxen that come into his circle of influence. And these he can actually tame. These require a little bit more help. These cannot be tamed at the moment. This is the perfect knowledge, again, that the Buddha has in relation to how the Buddha behaves with other beings. So as it says at the bottom there, likewise, the Lord Buddha joins to the path of the Aryas. Aryas are the Sangha, those who have superior knowledge. It's how Arya is usually translated as superior. Those who have direct insight into thusness, emptiness. So the Buddha joins to that path those disciples who are worthy of being joined to it. He restrains those few who, once joined, act contrary to the holy doctrine. The Buddha returns to the true path those who stray to a wrong one, and encourages with the iron prod of strenuousness those who are idle. Those unruly ones who are unfit to be joined to the path, he leaves undisturbed. For these reasons, he is called the unsurpassed leader of the ones who can be disciplined. Again, in our prayer, I think we have a slightly different praise. We say, Supreme Guide of human beings to be tamed. You're like the supreme guide because you can guide people exactly based on where they're at. Do you need a little help in getting kind of more aligned with the path, or are you just doing just fine, or are you really just totally outside of the path and need to be let go for the time being? It's not that the Buddha gives up on those beings, it's just that there's not a place for them in the path at that time. Hopefully, they will come back around through that karmic connection and still receive the advice they need. Now we have two verses from the Panchasatika Sutra, I imagine. You admonish the stubborn and bring under control those who go wrong. You restore the dishonest to rightful ways and stir on those who move too slowly. You join the subdued to the path and leave alone the unruly. Hence, you are the unsurpassed guide for those to be trained. Again, just showing the skillful means that the Buddha has, being able to work with each individual exactly as needed. Then it says the main body of disciples are gods and men. That's where we had that phrase, teachers of gods and men, as they are suitable vessels for the path of liberation. And because the Buddha teaches them the Dharma in accord with their wishes, he is the teacher of gods and men. Because of those qualities of teaching gods and men, again, not all gods are kind of sensitive to the Dharma. Some of them are too preoccupied with the pleasures of the God realm. But nonetheless, the Buddha does teach in those realms. To indicate that the one possessed of the foregoing qualities is the Lord Buddha, two more epithets are mentioned. The Buddha is both the awakened one, because he has awakened from the sleep of ignorance. This is what that term Buddha or Bodhi means in Sanskrit. The Buddha is the awakened one. And the fully developed one, because his mind has expanded to where it encompasses all objects of knowledge. So again, we saw that in our prayer where we have to you the completely and fully awakened one. So the awakened one that has the complete knowledge, that complete awareness, has expanded their mind to that degree. And then there's a few additional things again, endowed, transcendent destroyer, glorious conqueror, subduer from the Shakya clan, da 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 da. You can certainly use this praise as a way of recollecting the qualities of the Buddha. It's a wonderful praise to do that. Let's go on to the Dharma and recall that the Dharma is actually our main refuge of these three. Let me take it off screen just a moment. If we think about the Buddha's a great guy, right? Great being. But can we benefit from just the Buddha being there? The Buddha could appear here as, they say the Buddhas are permeating all realms of existence. Their consciousness never parted from any of us. But even if they were to take form and appear in front of us in the glorious form that they have, with all of these 32 major signs and 80 minor marks, all these things that it says signify their full development, even their presence wouldn't be of any lasting benefit. We gain some blessings and inspiration from that, perhaps, but they can't change our minds. What will change our minds is the Dharma. This is why they often use this analogy of these three jewels, the Buddha being like the perfect doctor, the Dharma being the perfect medicine, and the Sangha being like those assistants, which doesn't work perfectly in my mind because they're more like the patients who have already taken the medicine, right? But they can assist us because of their experience with the medicine. But what's the real refuge? The medicine itself. If we don't take the Dharma, if we don't actually engage in the Dharma, the teachings that are scriptures, and then gaining the more realizational Dharma, we will never make any progress on the path. No matter what kind of devotion we have to the Buddha, we need to have the Dharma. We need the Dharma to actually change our minds. So let's go and look at the second remembrance, second recollection, which again, we're being advised by Nagarjuna to recall every day. Now, there is again a little verse that is set out, and it's in that book I mentioned a short while ago by Venerable Chodron and His Holiness the Dalai Lama called Following in the Buddha's Footsteps. He says the following are the virtues of the Dharma. The Dharma of the Bhagawan is well proclaimed, rightly seen, free of malady, everlasting, rightly conveying, worthy to behold, and to be realized by the wise through personal experience. In brief, these qualities that are just set out indicate the twofold Dharma of doctrine or scripture and attainment or realization. So again, let me just emphasize this. When we talk about the Dharma jewel, we are usually talking about, first of all, the teachings, because we need those teachings. We don't have the realizations yet, right? How do you gain the realizations? Through the teachings, through the scriptures. The Buddha taught for 45 years. The whole corpus of his teachings, in terms of the Pali Canon, the Sanskrit canon, and of course, not just Sutra, but also Tantra, all of these encompass the scripture of the Dharma, the writings of the Dharma. And of course, as we receive them from great masters and so on, that oral lineage, oral transmission, all of that scriptural Dharma is what we need as a sort of boat to get us to the other shore. But it's not the main object of refuge either in terms of our final result, because until that doctrine, that scripture becomes realizational, we're still going to be in this state of confusion, right? We're still going to be going from life to life and being unenlightened. So the real kind of Dharma jewel, if you will, the ultimate Dharma jewel is the realizational Dharma, which actually has two aspects. It has the true paths. Remember the Four Noble Truths? We're going to see them again in this text in a bit. The Four Noble Truths, the first truth, truth of suffering, true sufferings, true origins of suffering, true cessations, and true paths. The true paths are these consciousnesses, these awarenesses that are realizational. When we actually are able to integrate the Dharma and attain this superior state that was mentioned, become an Arya, that's when we've attained kind of the Dharma realization at the level that we want to accomplish. Together with that is a true cessation, meaning that a portion of what is obscuring our minds, some level of the obscurations, obstructions has been removed. A true cessation is a negation. Again, we use negation in various ways in our culture. It's kind of a strange concept, but even emptiness is a negation as well, right? It means that we are negating something, in this case, that was there. With emptiness, it's something that was never there, but that we think is there. In this case, it's actually something that was there. We have obscurations in our minds, and they have to be ceased. They have to be gotten rid of so that they never occur again. That's how true paths work. They act as an antidote to a level of the obscuration so that you then have a true cessation of that level. Then you develop another true path that acts as to induce a true cessation of another level. And anyway, you continue this until you have removed everything that obscures the mind. Those who are aspiring just for their own liberation achieve the kind of abolishment or elimination of a good portion of what obscures the mind. But only the bodhisattvas on the Mahayana path aspire to remove all of what obscures the mind. We'll talk about some of that a little bit later. But this is what the Dharma can be divided into, is first scriptural versus realizational. And even within realizational, we can talk about the true paths that are the actual realization and the true cessations that are the removal of layers of these obscurations, what other term could use for it, contaminations, things that are again obscuring our minds currently. All right, let's go back to the text, and they're going to give us, Venerable Rendawa is going to give us an explanation of some of these epithets for the Dharma, these qualities, virtues of the Dharma. So we see about 4 lines down in that first paragraph, it says the quality of being well proclaimed refers to the Dharma of doctrine, the scripture, which is virtuous at the beginning, the middle, and the end, because it generates successively the 3 wisdoms of listening, contemplation, and meditation. So we're getting lots of 3s and various other numbers tonight, right? 12s and what have you. These 3 wisdoms are really important. We are gaining some measure of wisdom just by listening to these words that I'm reciting from Venerable Rendawa, Nagarjuna's words, or whatever commentary I'm giving. I'm hoping there's some wisdom in there. This is what we call the wisdom of listening or hearing. This is how our wisdom starts, right? Because we have to take those words in. We have to read the books. We have to listen to the videos. We have to do whatever we can to bring that information into our minds. It's interesting that they call that some level of wisdom already, because there is something that happens when the sort of light of these teachings shines in our minds, just by virtue of being introduced to the teachings. But that's not enough, right? We need a succession into the wisdom of contemplating or reflecting, or what we call thinking. And for most of us, this is what our meditation is when we do analytical meditation. We're thinking about the teachings. So, for example, for this week, what I would encourage you to think about in terms of these teachings is to spend time recollecting these jewels, sitting on your cushion and thinking about the qualities of the Buddha, the qualities of the Dharma, the qualities of the Sangha, and so on, recollecting them. When you do that sort of analysis, you begin to integrate these teachings more because you're actually thinking about them, thinking about the logic for them. Well, why is it that we can call the Buddha a Bhagawan, a conqueror? What is the logic behind it? What is it that a Buddha has accomplished? And some of the teachings involve a little different type of analysis, but the analysis is an important part of our work. We actually have to think about these teachings, come to see the truth for ourselves. Remember, that induces a deeper level of faith because we have greater conviction, because we've actually thought about the teachings. It makes sense when the Buddha says everything that is produced from causes and conditions is impermanent. Then we start thinking about what the ramifications of that are. We start thinking about how we actually cling to the opposite, and so on. Everything the Buddha teaches is to help us to remove our misconceptions and replace them with truth, with validity. You won't gain that understanding of validity without this wisdom of contemplation. The third level is the wisdom that arises from meditation. And here we're talking about when you have united it with concentration, when you actually have a firmer foundation for those realizations to take root, to actually change your mind and kind of change the very nature of your mind because you brought those realizations deeply into your mind where they'll never, go away. You achieve some of these deepest realizations, like becoming an Arya, having that insight into emptiness. It's irreversible. Once you have that, you're on your way out. You start moving in the direction of actually attaining liberation and enlightenment because you've altered your mind for good. And for good, literally, both ways. For good in terms of it being everlasting, and for good in terms of this is the best possible thing you could do for your mind, is to actually have that level of realization. But all three, again, are wisdoms, the wisdom from hearing, thinking, and then meditating, and they're built one upon the other. So again, we say that this is the way that the Dharma is good in the beginning, when we are just hearing those teachings. It's good in the middle, when we think about them, and it's good in the end, when we actually gain the deepest realization, uniting that wisdom with concentration. Again, even though these admittedly, this section, as Nagarjuna says, is about both householders and those who are ordained. But we all have this task to achieve eventually, right? We want to all be moving in the direction of this perfect wisdom, whether we have that maybe somewhat more ideal life of an ordained person who is able to devote their life to meditation and practice, or whether we're simply householders, practitioners like most of us are. We still want to have some building of that knowledge and wisdom. There's actually a wonderful verse that Geshe Sopa shares in the book, again, that I'm encouraging you to read. That's on, I think this is, page 12. He says, hearing the teachings is the lamp that clears away the darkness of ignorance. Study is the best form of wealth. It cannot be stolen or destroyed. It is a staunch comrade, even if you become impoverished. Instruction on the method is your best friend. This is apparently from the Jataka tales, the garland of birth stories of the Buddha. So it's one of the sutras that pertains to that. But it's a really beautiful verse because it's essentially saying, invest in your own study and practice of the Dharma, because that is wealth you'll never lose. Most people spend this life accumulating the physical wealth, right? Having beautiful homes and lots of possessions and a lot of money in the bank and blah, 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 blah. We know all of this, right? But that's gone the moment you die, right? You can't take a penny with you. Not even a penny goes with you. But what will go with you is what you have done in terms of your study and practice. So it's great that you're all doing this tonight and that you're all here investing in wanting to learn the Dharma, to be involved in the Dharma, and just feel good about that. Feel like that is what we're here to do. That is an important part of making sure we have something we can carry forward into our next life. All right, so let's go back to the text and a little more quickly, we'll go through the rest of these terms that refer to the qualities of the Dharma. The remaining qualities that were in that first line of that previous paragraph refer to the Dharma of attainment, he calls it. Again, or we could say realization, with the first five indicating the truth of the path, the true paths, meaning the wisdom consciousness that is knowing emptiness, suchness. And again, those were the qualities such as rightly seen, free of malady, everlasting, and so on. And it says, furthermore, they represent this truth in terms of its first essential nature and its attributes. So the essential nature of that wisdom consciousness, that true path, and then the attributes of that. The expression rightly conveying indicates the former in the sense that the Dharma constitutes a path because it conveys to the devotee the result of nirvana. It kind of takes you to that result. It conveys it, it assures that you will have the proper path to attain that. The essential nature of the Dharma is such, is that it will accomplish that for you. Then it says three attributes of the path are that it is pure by nature, it illuminates the true nature of all objects of knowledge, and thirdly, it overcomes all adverse things. The first of these is referred to in the expression we had again previously in that previous page, worthy to behold, because like a lamp, the path radiates light by its very nature. That is the nature of this, it's the light of wisdom that can be known, and that is the nature of the Dharma. The expression rightly seen, which we saw on the previous page, refers to the second attribute, for the path allows unerring insight into the true nature of reality, that perfect sight, that perfect wisdom. In fact, when you have your first realization of that, it's called the path of seeing, the path of sight, that you are actually seeing things rightly, correctly, in line with how they actually exist. The third is referred to in the previous page in the expression free of malady, free of what is sort of disruptive or not so healthy, because with the path's attainment, all the latent potential of the mental afflictions, the kleshas, is eliminated. That potential's gone. When you have fully realized you have removed all of that potential, there's no longer anything more that will make you sick or ill or have any sort of negative results whatsoever because you are free of all of those causes and conditions. So this is the nature of the Dharma, is that it conveys you to that result and so on, all the various things that we just looked at. Further, since the potential is eliminated for all time and not a limited period, the Dharma is said to be everlasting. Right? This is once you change your mind, you fall away from that. It's not like we were Buddhas at one point and then we fell from that state of grace into some, inferior existence. No, once you attain that state of that, there's no more work to be done. I was talking about the path of seeing. That's the third path of the five. The fifth path, which is Buddhahood, is called the path of no more learning. School's out once and for all. No more learning. It's everlasting. You never deteriorate from that, degenerate from it. The phrase to be realized by the wise through personal experience refers to the truth of cessation. Remember, that was the other part of the realizational. You have the true paths, and then you have the true cessation of levels of obscuration, which can neither be determined by logical speculation nor explained through verbal expression, because it is the object of transcending awareness that is realized by each meditator for himself. I can't say much about that other than that it's again something that you will know when you attain that state. Some people wonder, well, I had a pretty deep meditation. Did I achieve anything in terms of getting further on the path? Well, you will know, because what will appear to your mind as well is that cessation, which is quite profound. It is like some portion of what obscures the mind has been removed once and for all. By a true cessation, we mean it is removed, and again, it will never occur again. It will never return. And again, we do that with regard to various levels of obscuration until we've removed them all. And that's when you become a Buddha. So now we have a little bit of verses that come up that give us a little bit further explanation. And these first two jewels First two recollections have a lot more to them. Sangha a bit, but not as much. And then certainly the last few, there's not much to talk about at all. So we'll get through with this in just a moment. The following quotation from the scripture Uttara Tantra, this is actually the text that I just taught on at Thupta Norbuling, our sister center down in Santa Fe last year on Thursdays. That's one reason why I couldn't be up here with you on Thursdays the latter part of the year, because I was still teaching that text. The course is called the Tathagata Essence in the basic program, the FPMT basic program. This is from the entire course is on chapter 1, and this is the 9th verse, and it serves as a definition of the Dharma or the Dana. I think it actually should be Dharma. I just didn't change it. Again, when I copied this stuff over from the PDF file into my Word file, it didn't always translate correctly. So that should be actually Dharma. I'll change that later, but obeisance to that which cannot be examined with regard to either its non-existing, existing, both existing and non-existing, or something other than existing or non-existing. This is this first quality, which is that what you're looking at in terms of a true cessation of these obscurations, it doesn't exist inherently. It doesn't have any way of existing inherently because it's a product of realizing the lack of inherent existence. Again, I won't go too deeply into that tonight. It also has no verbal explanation, is to be realized for oneself, and constitutes peace. There's no way of actually completely delineating, as was just said, what a true cessation is, because you have to experience it. Even emptiness itself, you have to experience, even though we can give words to it and point out how to realize it. The actual realization is very different. They say it's the difference between tasting the bark of the sugar cane and the actual cane itself. The sweetness of the cane will be much different than just the taste of the bark. And of course, has to be realized for oneself. This is the only way that we will ever really know what that truth is, the true cessation, and of course, the true path. But the true path itself constitutes peace. It's endowed, it's a sort of sun endowed with the radiance of immaculate wisdom, he says, which overcomes attachment, hatred, and ignorance towards all objects. The Dharma has that level of power and purity to it. There are said to be 8 qualities in here, but I'm not going to go through all of them in real deep detail. Just know that the Dharma is our true refuge. It's what we are really relying upon. It's what we want to have our full conviction in, that the Dharma is our way out. It's our ticket out of here and our ticket to be able to help others do the same work. The recollection of the Sangha, the following are virtues of the Sangha. The Sangha, those who listen to the Bhagawan, are virtuous in conduct, upright in conduct, proper in conduct, and decorous in conduct. I think that's how it's pronounced. It's not a word we use very often, right? These expressions indicate the virtues of the Sangha's practice. Because they abide properly in the 3 trainings of, remember those guys, morality, meditative concentration, and superior wisdom, those 3 trainings. That's why the Sangha is said to be respectively virtuous in conduct, upright in conduct, proper in conduct. It's because they have those qualities that are a product of these 3 trainings. In other words, the first one, that they actually have kind of a correct practice of virtue. The second one, being upright in conduct, means that they are on the right track through having developed the stability of mind that will get you to the wisdom. And then the wisdom itself makes one true or proper in conduct because you're realizing what needs to be realized. And then it says here, further, because every one of them conducts themselves in a like manner with regard to material things, morality, views, and rights, the Sangha are said to be decorous in conduct. Decorous kind of means exhibiting appropriate behavior, kind of being in line with things, having that appearance and what have you. And of course, it's not just an appearance in this case, it's how they actually are. But they have that appearance because of these qualities. The following are the virtues which make the Sangha worthy of reverence. The Sangha who listen to the Buddha are always worthy of offerings, worthy of great offerings, worthy of circumambulation, and worthy of being addressed with joined palms, an unsurpassed field of merit for all the world. The Sangha are described with the first two, middle two, and final expressions because they are endowed with the virtues of each of the three trainings respectively. So if you were to take those three trainings and kind of parse them up in terms of all these various qualities, that's how they would fit. Let's go back to just what do we mean by Sangha? And we use this term Sangha very loosely in our spiritual centers, our Dharma centers, right? And we might think of the people who are gathered here together in the Gompa, as well as on Zoom or listening to this as part of this spiritual community, are a Sangha. And in some ways, it's an okay term, but that's not what we mean by the Sangha jewel. The Sangha jewel is referring specifically to beings who, as I mentioned a short while ago, they are Aryas. Arya means a superior being, one who has had that direct insight into emptiness. So technically, you don't become a Sangha jewel until you have that true path, and of course, the true cessation that comes with it. You know, you can have the true path as the moment before you have the true cessation, so you'd be a Sangha jewel then, but very quickly you would have the true cessation following. So what we mean by a Sangha jewel is a being who actually has that level of realization. That's what makes them worthy of veneration, worthy of our respect, but also someone who we put our confidence and trust in. And we don't know who has those realizations. That's why we should be very respectful of anyone, especially those in our spiritual communities, because most people don't go around professing to have these realizations. Look at His Holiness the Dalai Lama, whose qualities are incredible, right? And all he says when he introduces himself is, I'm just a simple Buddhist monk. You know, I have no great realizations. I know a little bit of what bodhicitta is, you know. But he never talks about, you know, oh, and I've realized emptiness, I'm a full Buddha, da da da. You know, so we recognize that humility is also a part of what it means to be enlightened. It's not that you go around advertising to the world all your realizations. No, I'm not saying that somebody who does that can't be trusted, but I think we have to be very careful if people do profess to have realizations. And we can have that respect for them, but if we see that things are contrary in terms of their behavior, then maybe we have some questions. But nonetheless, this is something we can attain. We can become a Sangha jewel. So the steps, in a sense, is that the Buddha first introduces us to the Dharma, that's the scriptural Dharma that we take in, and then we eventually achieve the realization of that Dharma, and that's what makes us a Sangha jewel. So the Dharma jewel itself is actualized within our minds, making us a Sangha jewel. When we continue to develop our minds, we eventually become the Buddha jewel, which is the supreme among them, the ultimate jewel, but nonetheless, where we have to rely right now is on the Dharma jewel. And when we become a Sangha jewel for others, then we can help them, and eventually a Buddha jewel. But in terms of relying on Sangha, don't think that just because somebody is in a spiritual community that they are a good source of reliance. Some people are, some people aren't, right? Some people may be taking these teachings to heart and doing an amazing job of exhibiting that in terms of their behavior and their influence, while other people may be really, you know, they haven't gotten it yet. You know, they're still working on it. And so they're good to, again, associate with to some degree, but be mindful that they may not be where we really want to put our reliance. So when we're recollecting the Sangha jewel, we're recollecting those beings who have attained that state. All right. And I want to share just a little bit before we go to these last three. There's not much again on these last three recollections. Going back to following in the footsteps of the Buddha, there's a wonderful little quote here about these epithets for all of these. Well, actually, this one was for the Buddha. It says, these epithets give us much to contemplate by illustrating the Buddha's qualities and the reasons he is a reliable object of refuge. They provide insight into the Dharma he practiced that enabled him to attain these qualities, and the realizations the Sangha actualize as they follow the same path. Inspired to practice the path, we feel grateful that the Buddha has shared the precious Dharma methods with us. So this is kind of one of the ways that we can work with this idea of the recollection. As recollecting the Buddha even, we are already bringing to mind the Dharma and the preciousness of the Dharma, because that's how the Buddha became endowed with all those qualities. And the Sangha are those beings who are in line with that, aspiring and moving in the direction of becoming a Buddha themselves. So we always have this kind of, respect and gratitude for the Buddha and the Dharma that he taught by virtue of these But then the other passage I wanted to share, I think, comes towards the end. Let me see if that's here. Oh, I don't know. Maybe I missed it somewhere along the line. Okay, good enough. I'll see if I can find it for next class. But so those are the first three recollections. Again, those are something that we can do very frequently, because if you have taken your refuge sort of commitment to heart through the formal ceremony of taking refuge, or even in your own heart taking refuge, that is one of your commitments that you need to take every day, of reciting the refuge formula and recollecting the qualities of the three jewels. So you should be hopefully doing that to some degree whenever you take refuge. But by reflecting in this way through what Venerable Randawa has shared, we can gain an appreciation for the role that the three jewels play for us. By the way, this little booklet that I mentioned that has the sutra recollecting the three jewels, this actually is written from a Mahayana perspective. So when it talks about the Sangha, it talks about the Bodhisattva Sangha. Because remember, there are also those in the Sangha who are aspiring just for their own liberation. We call the Hinayana Sangha, or the hearers and solitary realizers, as they're often called. Okay. Let's go on back to the text and finish off this subject of the six recollections. I was worried I wouldn't get much beyond this tonight, because this is such a long commentary on just one verse, but there's a lot to think about here. Now you might wonder, well, what's with these practices? The practice of generosity, the practice of morality, these next two. The following are the virtues of generosity. Verily, the abilities I have acquired to dwell with a mind free of avarice, free of greed, amongst beings corrupted by the impurity of greed, performing acts of offering and liberality wholeheartedly, to take delight in extending the hand and giving, as well as to induce others to generosity, are qualities well acquired indeed. Well, we see that one of the qualities that the Bodhisattva even develops on the path is generosity, giving. We're going to see that come around when we talk about the six perfections. But this is kind of something that we can see is an important part of our practice, because this is also one of the main things that we need to do to gain a good rebirth. And those of you who've studied the perfect human rebirth, we're going to see teachings on it as part of this text as well. We talk again on so many different of the topics of the Lam Rim, but they're not in the same order. Usually perfect human rebirth is talked about towards the beginning, because we have to recognize the state that we currently possess and the opportunity it has. But we learn that the causes for creating this are actually pretty rare. Because first of all, we need the practice of morality. Well, that's the next one, right? We're going to get to that's our fifth recollection. That's the real seed that ripens into a good rebirth. Because if we have refrained from killing and stealing and all the non-virtues, we've engaged in the virtuous opposites of those, we will have created the causes for good rebirths. But that's not enough. Many people have a human rebirth in this life, right? Look at 8 billion almost of us on this planet. But how many of them actually have the exact conditions they need to continue practicing the Dharma, or to reach some level of understanding and realization with regard to these teachings? Generosity is said to be one of the additional causes besides morality that we need to engage in for a perfect human rebirth, because we want to be born with the ideal conditions, the circumstances that support our being able to use that life well. I mean, it's sad, but when we think about beings on this planet, human beings on this planet, who spend from the time they get up to the time they go to bed just trying to procure the resources they need to keep their bodies alive and their families' bodies alive, it's sad. It's a wonderful sort of act of generosity of them doing that for other people or what have you, but it's not an ideal situation, because they don't have the leisure, the fortune to be able to use that life more meaningfully. I'm not saying again that I'm in any way negating if they're going out looking for water and food to feed their family. Well, that's wonderful that they're performing again that act of seeking out those resources for the sake of relieving others' suffering. But that's a way that your whole life is going to be preoccupied with those sorts of base needs. You're never going to go beyond that. I always, when I start thinking about these sorts of concepts, go back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Some of us studied it earlier on in our education. And, we do see there's some truth to that. Unless you have sort of the basic foundational stuff covered, you don't look at higher things, what Maslow would call self-actualization and what have you. Those sorts of things are more elusive. Why? Because your main focus is getting food to your mouth, making sure that you don't go to bed with an empty stomach. And this is a reality for human beings on this planet right now. Something I think we could remedy, but nonetheless, this is the situation that we're faced with. So you need good morality, but you need an act of giving. Why? Because giving creates resources. That's the karma of giving. Every one of you can tell you have resources because you're in comfortable homes with clothes, good clothes, and you look well fed and everything. You've got the resources in this life. Those didn't come from just your working in this life or however you got your money, procured your money in this life. The reason why you have those resources is because of your prior acts of generosity. We're going to see that coming up in the very next verse where we start talking about karma, the various karmas we want to adopt and those we want to discard. One of the most effective ways of getting a good rebirth with all the conditions is to engage in acts of giving as much as we can. Everything from giving food to our pets or to the birds in our yard to being very generous and sharing our resources as much as we can with whatever sort of cause or thing that presents itself to us. We want to be kind of like just a mechanism by which resources come to us and we funnel them back out to others. And it's kind of hard for us to think that way because we always want to be a little stingy, we want to be holding a little bit back. But we're supposed to be a conduit, just kind of taking things in and making sure they go back out. I think we even talked about this once. I had a copy of this book to bring up to you, Stella. I'll bring it up the next time, called The Soul of Money. I mentioned how there's this woman, Lynn Twist. She actually does these workshops and changing our relationship to money, seeing money in that way is kind of this, it has power to it, but it only has power if we keep it flowing, keep it moving. If it becomes still, it becomes sort of stagnant and diseased. The whole objective of money is to kind of create that sort of flow. Anyway, generosity is always highlighted. We have three main causes for getting a good rebirth. One is morality, good acts that produce the seeds for that actual rebirth. Generosity, and they often include the other perfections because we also want some of the conditions that come with those. But generosity is so important because that's how we get resources in that good rebirth. And then the third one is making stainless prayers, actually putting that thought out there. May I get a chain of good rebirths until attaining the states of liberation and enlightenment. May I continue to have these ideal conditions. So this is my estimation. It's not set out by Geshe-Sopa, but I think that this is why these two are emphasized here in particular, is because we have to be mindful that that's kind of our task. And as householders, I think that is actually a good part of what we're here to do. I would venture to say that most of us are probably not going to become a Buddha in this life. I mean, it's a wonderful thought, and I'm not discouraging you from having that thought of saying, may I become a Buddha as quickly as possible for the benefit of all beings. But most of us probably don't have the ability to use this life in that way. We have to at least create the next rebirth, the good things that will ensue from us having used this life well, letting go of our attachment to this life and to the possessions of this life and practicing good morality and generosity so that we have a good rebirth, so that we have that kind of future life assured. So let me kind of conclude this. I want to actually get this done. I know we're down to the last few minutes here. We saw those virtues of generosity. Did we read this? The following are the virtues of generosity. Verily, I think I did read that. It says, this statement illustrates the following qualities of liberality, which is kind of an antiquated phrase too, to be adopted in one's person, being liberal with one's resources, abandoning the impurity of greed, being of a generous nature, initiating bodily effort, bestowing objects, and doing so joyfully. I think most of those are pretty easy to understand. This is what generosity is about, is us being able to get rid of our greedy, tight, miserly mind, continuing to be of a generous nature, sharing what we have and so on, and doing it joyfully. If we have a mind that's always regretting that we're giving things away, well, then that's not so good. Right? Morality, the virtues of morality are expressed as follows. My morality is unbroken, unflawed, undefiled, unsoiled, self-controlled, praised by sages, and leads to the attainments of samadhi, Again, samadhi, that means meditative stabilization, concentration. It is built on morality. So that's how we want our morality to be. This statement also illustrates qualities here of morality to be adopted into one's person. They will be further explained upon the occasion of the lines, you should practice a morality unbroken, not debased, undefiled, untainted, uncorrupted. We're going to see that coming up in verse 7. Hopefully we'll be there before too long, but nonetheless, this is illustrating that morality is something we need to be recollecting and thinking about the importance of. I will cover the deities, the last recollection, when we reconvene next week, because it's already 7:30 here, so. All right, any questions on what I've covered tonight? If there are any questions from the Zoom room, you can put your hand up. Yes, Sarah, please.
What was that you said a minute ago that you fixate in your mind or you pray to have more positive rebirths? Tell me that again. You should do this in the context of your meditation.
And okay, so Sarah's asking, what was it that I said in terms of the third of these three causes of a good rebirth, which are what we call stainless prayers. They can be part of your prayers you make in your before your meditation or what have you, but they're probably quite effective, or most effective, when we dedicate at the end. When we make a dedication at the end, it's useful to bring in thoughts like, may my practice ripen into a continuity of good rebirths so that I can, as quickly as possible, achieve liberation and enlightenment.
Okay, and these stainless prayers will supposedly have some effect.
They have some effect, yes.
Just the thoughts,
Mhm.
this is what you want, will have some,
I know it sounds wild.
it does sound a little.
Well, remember what, so Sarah's questioning, just having these thoughts, is that enough to produce the result? It's not the only factor, keep that in mind. It's one of three factors. Like if you have that thought, but then you're killing beings all day, you're not going to create the main cause for a good rebirth. But the idea is that Venerable Rabina often says this, everything exists on the tip of a wish, right? You recall her saying that, I'm sure, one time or another. And that is kind of true to some degree. The thoughts we have effects. They are causes in and of themselves for effects. Now, again, I'm not saying that we can sit there and think, oh, I want to fly. May I fly? May I be able to, levitate off the ground? That is enough for me to actually levitate. I'm not saying that it's that simple. I'm saying this is a contributing factor, particularly when we talk about these very virtuous results that we're trying to accomplish. Now, again, it might be sort of already encompassed when we say things like, may I become a Buddha as quickly as possible for the sake of others through this practice, through what I've done. It kind of implies to some degree, may everything line up for me to be able to do that. But I think it's really good to be quite explicit. Like Venerable Rabina, there was one period, I don't know if this is still where she's at, I haven't seen her in quite a while, where she was really keen on being reborn in Amitabha's Pure Land. She heard Rinpoche talk about this so many times. That is a place where you really do have to make a concerted thought, like, may I be reborn there, and make prayers. There is even a whole prayer that you can do every day that's about being reborn in this Pure Land, where it said you can become a Buddha in that Pure Land.
Yeah, I remember her saying that specifically, that was what her aspiration in this slide.
Yeah.
To be born there. I've often wondered, suppose like, if you could not sort of program yourself for a next rebirth, if you wanted to make a greater contribution. In other words, program yourself to be a nun or to be I think these people in labs who do research that kill off disease, what a wonderful thing to be able to do. You'd be affecting millions of people.
Right.
So I've often wondered if you couldn't think about that, pray on that, and actually program a desirable rebirth in that sense.
So again, I don't know if everyone online heard Sarah's thoughts, but is she saying, is it possible to sort of program yourself to be of whatever benefit in future lives, such as a researcher who would help cure disease? Or, there's that wonderful prayer that we sometimes recite as a dedication verse from Shantideva, where we kind of are making those strong intentions. But even there's an earlier part of Shantideva's text where we actually take it in the first person. We say, may I be a guide to those who are guideless, a leader to those who are entering the path,
That's
a
the
ship,
prayer,
a
right?
ship, a boat, a bridge for those who wish to cross over water.
Yeah.
May I be a garden for those who seek a garden, light for those who look for light, bedding for those who wish to rest, and a servant for all who want me as their servant. I mean, that's one version of those verses. Those are powerful prayers to make because it's like you want to become wish fulfilling for others. And you could make them very specific in terms of a particular way to be, or become a nun in your next life or a monk or whatever you're inclined to do, to have that strong aspiration to enter into the ordained life from a very young age and practice that path. So all fine aspirations to make.
Yeah.
And they do have some fruit because we keep setting our mind there. The mind starts formulating the way in which that karma will ripen. But as I said, it's not the only thing. We have to create the other causes.
Well, that works in
Yeah.
this lifetime. If
Sure.
we think about something hard enough, and we often, that will often
Yeah, it's very true.
manifest.
Yeah.
I have a picture of Amitabha's Pure Land and I put it in my bedroom.
Uh,
And so that, I don't know what it means. It's, very lavish and so forth, but I thought maybe
yeah,
subconsciously I can absorb some of that,
yeah.
place.
Yeah, I think some of these images of Amitabha's Pure Land, like you're speaking to, Sarah, or any of these things that inspire those thoughts are useful tools to help us keep thinking about it. And you're right, it's the same as like our worldly things. If you wanted to travel to India or to Nepal and you put like pictures of all these beautiful things in India and the temples and the wonderful monasteries in Nepal, Kopan, or monastery, all these things, all these beautiful, and then every day you're getting inspired to like go there, right? Because you're seeing those images and thinking, I want to see those in person. I want to be there at the Mahabodhi stupa and Bodh Gaya and where the Buddha attained enlightenment. I want to have that inspiration. But if you don't do that, then maybe your thoughts don't get as strong. I think we see it works. It works in this life even. So, were there any questions from folks online? Anyone? Okay. No other questions here. So again, my advice for you is to spend a little bit of time going through these 5 recollections that we've touched on, especially the 3 jewels, but even generosity and morality, just like really taking delight in the ways that you practice those, but also in those practices themselves that are part and parcel of attaining these wonderful results, of practicing the Dharma, to have the mind of generosity, of giving, as well as the practice of morality. Then we'll touch on the deities when we resume next week. All right, so if Mary, if you would share the prayers, and then Jana can lead us in those.
We'll do our dedication prayer. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions,
May I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase ever and more.
We'll do the long life prayers for our teachers, beginning with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. The
Wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world. To the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled.
And for Osohita Lama-Yeshe's reincarnation.
Venerable One, to you whose kindness exceeds that of all the conquerors, for those wanderers in far-off places, especially the West, mindful of your loving concern for us in intentionally descending again into a family of a far distant land, we make this request. O Lama, please, please live long.
And for the swift return of Lama Zopa Rinpoche, peerless
teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, victorious Losang, father and sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of the infinite lands, Please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now. Holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice, you wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable venerable Guru, to you I make request. While striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and for mother living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. What a grave loss! Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels, and the great waves of bodhicitta of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. We might think to dedicate for those beings we're holding in our heart right now. I don't know if there's a prayer list. Is there a prayer list? Is that it there? On the chair? Is that it on the chair in front of me? Or back there? Oh,
Yeah, do you want me to read it? Sure.
yes, please, Sarah.
Okay, we have no one for obstacles. Does anyone want to add there?
Yes, I would like to add a lady named Gina. I didn't get her last name, but she's imprisoned in Uganda.
And the name again is Gina?
Yes,
Okay, anybody else? And for illness, we have Jane. Is there anyone else?
I'm Rolf Dubler.
Rolf,
Yeah, emphysema and COPD. Dubler.
okay.
Had my mom, Joanne.
And then
Anybody
Mary,
else?
Yes.
Mary said her mom, Joanne, for
Joanne.
illness. Thank you, Mary.
Elena. And Rosemary.
A little louder, please.
Rosemary P.
Okay, Rosemary.
Elena.
Oh, and I just thought of someone else. His name is Ken, and he is in Denver at the Swedish hospital.
Good. So Ken.
Ken. Okay, and then for death, I'm adding John Else, and there's another name here,
That's Eve Dubler.
Eve Dubler.
Yeah, and I just want to say he's my nephew through marriage, 36 years old. And he got diagnosed with something that's like a Lou Gehrig's disease
Oh,
and has a 3.5-year-old little girl that he was raising himself with the help of his parents. And slowly they watched him deteriorate. We talked to his dad last night. And anyway, he passed away last week.
Yeah, thank you, Stone.
okay, so that's Eve Dubler
Mhm.
and John Else. Anyone else for death?
For death, anyone? You need to dedicate one. All right, so these beings that we brought to mind more specifically, but also all sentient beings who are enduring suffering of these types in this world, we dedicate for their welfare, that they may be free of these types of suffering, find all the causes and conditions that will lead them to attaining true peace and happiness. And may all beings have these results through what we've done here tonight. Okay, thank you all very much. Again,